Let's do this.
It's time for Hanging with Langan.
I like that she's got a big dirty mouth that gets her in trouble.
Wow.
Stop me, 'cause I'm having a good time.
Oh my God, we're here. Hello, you guys. Hello, everyone. I know we had some tech issues. Hanging with Langan, starting right now. So excited. And I know many of you are emailing me, Maureen, I'm so excited about this show. I have a great professor from Boston University coming on in just a moment. We're talking about his book. It's called Belonging and Betrayal, How the Jews Made the Art World Modern. Professor Charles, I got to say his name correctly, Dellheim. So I'm excited. We're going to have him in just a moment. And I told him, look, some people watching in my vast Hanging with Langan audience are connoisseurs. Some are curators of the finest art. And many others don't know the difference between Vermeer and Van Gogh. And I went to that Van Gogh experience, and that was a bad experience. I did not like that at all. And some of you got mad at me. I'm like, no wonder the guy chopped his ear off. He was like, is that my future? I'm going to be like commercialized, spinning right round like a record baby, right round all across America. Oh my, that is not what he wanted for himself. But before I bring on the great professor and author, couple shout outs, you guys. I will be, got some good gigs coming up. September 16th in Los Gatos, California, the Montalvo Art Center. September 18th, Bellingham, Washington at the Mount Baker Theater. September 22nd, Mill Valley in Marin County, California. The 24th of September, Long Island, Belmore, Long Island at the Brokerage. And Long Beach Island in New Jersey on the 25th. Go to MaureenLangan.com and check out all my gigs. I want you guys to come out. We'll have a good time. So there's that. All right. I am calling this segment, this is what I'm calling it, Understanding the Nazis, the Jews, and Modern Art 101. We know I think most of us know that in World War II, the Nazis, they were killing Jewish people and others, and they were stealing and taking the art, because if they're going to kill people, why wouldn't they take their art? We hear stories about this stolen art that belonged to these Jewish people, these families, ending up in museums around the world. So today, my guest is going to talk about how and why certain European Jews acquired so much art to begin with, because it was predominantly the Gentile world. So how did they make inroads, and what did that mean, and what was the repercussions of that? So please welcome my guest. He is the son of a German Jewish refugee, professor of history at Boston University, and author of Belonging and Betrayal, How Jews Made the Art World Modern. Let's welcome Professor Charles Dellheim. Hello.
Nice to be here.
Finally, yes.
Finally, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Right.
Well, thanks to you.
Oh, yes.
If it had been up to me, we would be in the ether still.
I'm telling you, it's like I work in Silicon Valley now. I am glad that you can join me. And what I like is learning about things that may not be uppermost in most people's minds. But I often hear about how the Nazis stole the art belonging to the Jewish people in World War II. And you brought up a good point that, yes, we talk about from that point on, but what happened prior to that, where the Jewish people were curators and art dealers, and so paint the picture for us pre-Nazis.
Sure. I mean, traditionally, Jews were at the margins of European civilization, and art was close to its center. Art was the preserve of princes, nobles, the prelates of the church. And it had a kind of quasi-sacred, or in some ways sacred significance, especially in the world of Christianity and European old masters. The institutions that shaped taste, the academies and the salon, the academy which trained artists, the salon which displayed art, were long-established institutions. In France, they go back to Louis XIV and 1648. And Jews were excluded from this world. And what begins to change is a couple of things. First, there's the emancipation of Jews, which is a gradual and piecemeal process, takes place at different times and places throughout Europe. It's by no means a story of one triumph after another. but there's a great migration of Jews eventually from Russia and Eastern Europe to Central and Western Europe. And without this emancipation and the granting of civil rights, none of these things would have happened. But there are also two other things that happened which were not caused by Jews, but had a profound effect on the opportunities that Jews had. The first was, in the course of the 19th century, the aristocracy, which had traditionally been the great patrons of art, fell on hard times, especially in places like England. Their land values fell. They had to pay death duties and income taxes. And while some of these people were extraordinarily rich and by far the most glamorous people in the country, witness Downton Abbey, they very often had little in the way of liquid capital, and they had to sell assets, and they would sell cattle or claret or a townhouse or a piece of land. But some of their most valuable assets were family art collections, some of which had been in the families for generations. So suddenly, in the late 19th century, for basically economic reasons, the aristocracy, which had been the great patrons, the great buyers, are sellers. So there's this enormous moment of opportunity, not only for the European new rich, but for the American new rich. And the people that I look at, these Jewish entrepreneurs, what's interesting about them is really a couple of things. First, almost all of them come from very ordinary commercial backgrounds. Nathan Wildenstein, horse dealer, Joel Duveen, vegetable salesman, Ernst Gampel, commodities broker. They are not formally educated. They certainly don't have great education in art, but they apply the skills, the habits, the contacts, and the very modest capital they have to going into the world of art dealing. And
are these American Jews, or we're talking European Jews? These gentlemen who you just named, because I don't know.
At this point, these are almost exclusively European Jews in places like Britain, France, Germany, Austria, and so forth.
So these are working people. You said, I mean, they must be successful. One is working in commodities, and the other has a ranch. So they're doing well. They're the nouveau riche. They're making some money, and they're like, let me buy the prince's art piece.
Well, some of them are. You know, it's interesting, Maureen. The dealers themselves often came from very hard scrabble backgrounds. They didn't have money. The people they sold to, though, the capitalist new rich, were people with great wealth, Jews and non-Jews, whether it was J.P. Morgan or Isabella Stewart Gardner or Benjamin Altman. So these are moneyed people with cultural ambitions. And the dealers that I look at were people who trained their eyes and who used their commercial skills to take advantage of this big opportunity. That's one part of the story.
So there was a big opportunity because of financial situations in the land of the very wealthy, the kings and queens, Britain, and all that. They felt that there was a vacuum and said, wow, this is a great opportunity because they're selling off these assets because they need the money. So what's interesting to me is the title of your book, Belonging and Betrayal. At the beginning part of the title of that book connotes they belong to this part of this world, part of this universe, and then they were betrayed. That seems obvious in your title. So talking about, they started to get a foothold in this Gentile world, and then they were betrayed how?
So the belonging, as I think we've all seen during the pandemic, Aristotle said human beings are social animals, and Jews lived in basically in autonomous communities apart from Gentile society until emancipation. And when they become emancipated, in theory, they have political and civil rights, though in practice, Some rights are granted immediately and others come later. But they don't have a sense of respectability. They don't have social status. They are, in some ways, have cut themselves off from Orthodox Jewish ways, but they're not really fully integrated into this Gentile world. And one of the fundamental quests of Jews, though it's not just Jews, is this quest to belong and to succeed, to find a way in. And there are different ways of doing it, but culture, and not just art, though I think art is perhaps the most important, is an essential part of this story. So if you are a Jew and you want to belong, or you want to try to belong, one of the things you can do is convert to Christianity. Whether you'd be fully accepted then or not, that's another question. But for those who didn't want to convert, but who wanted to find a way into their society, art dealing, art collecting is a tremendous substitute because it's about cultural knowledge. And citizenship, as we know, is political, but it's also cultural. It's about the ways in which you affiliate with your society. And this was part of the pattern of the well-to-do middle class who were imitating the old aristocracy, and at the higher level, the princes. And Jews are very much part of this. And the desire to belong, we know is very, very deep.
Sure.
But it's also problematic. It's problematic because this is a world in which racial theories abound. In which, not just then, right?
Right.
And it's a world in which those who are different, those who are alien, are looked askance upon. And remember, Jews are Europe's resident minority. They live in Europe for, going back to the Roman era, if not earlier. But it doesn't mean they belong. And what happens...
Living and belonging are two very separate things. Let me reset this topic and let people who are just coming in now on the .com, on Facebook, YouTube Live, and of course we're going to be putting this up on all the major podcast platforms. So subscribe to Hanging with Langan on Apple. Go to Maureen Langan and you'll see where all that is. But my guest is Professor Charles Dellheim. He's a professor at Boston University. And his book is really fascinating. It's coming out at the end of June, September 21st, I believe, 22nd, on Amazon. Belonging and Betrayal, How Jews Made the Art World Modern. So, I wanted to say to you about this. So the first part, we talk about belonging and the need. We talk about Jews being emancipated, but that's piecemeal. A little bit here, a little bit there, in this society, not in that society. I just found out my Sicilian lover, his mother, full-on Jewish, never told him. 100%. Her parents were from Romania and Russia. Never told him. Is that insanity? I mean, who knows why? I don't know why. But we found a letter from the grandfather leaving Romania saying, why should I be conscripted to serve in the military in my country that doesn't value me as a Jew? This letter, it's like, wow. So we talk about emancipation at different times, sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 back. We see that on our own politics in America on different issues. So now they're belonging. You have Jews in the art world working with artists like Picasso and art dealings and that type of work, right? Were they representing some of these artists? Tell me about that.
So Picasso is this kind of amazing figure. He didn't have quite as many art dealers as mistresses, but almost every art dealer he had, unlike his mistresses, was Jewish. He went from this remarkable woman, Berthe Weil, to Daniel Henri Kahnweiler, from Kahnweiler to Léonce Rosenberg, then to Léonce's younger brother, Paul, and then back to Kahnweiler. So he got around. Picasso was very distrustful of dealers. When he came to Paris, he was very poor, and there was nothing romantic about poverty. He had great hopes, but he was scraping by, and he had a kind of adversary relationship with the dealers. He thought that the dealers were always going to take him up and to allow him to make a living. But things, especially at first, didn't work well. And the first person who he begins to work with is this woman named Berthe Weil, who is a Jewish woman from a very modest middle-class family, goes to work in the antiques trade, and breaks her mother's heart by deciding to use her dowry to open her own art gallery rather than marry. This wasn't what the parents had in mind. She had spectacular taste, and she was a woman of extraordinarily high principle. She was so dedicated to her artists that she went to jail rather than turn in Modigliani when there was a case of an obscene picture, or what was considered to be an obscene picture.
What was it? Tell me. Don't pass over that, Professor Chuck. What was this obscene photo that he did?
Well,
Not photo.
I'm not going to get me over, but my cord just slipped out. So
I can't believe this.
Let's-
Because his cord unplugged.
unless we have more technical problems.
That's right. I'll keep talking. You know what I'm going to do? There's a great quote that I have from Kafka that was part of this book. I'm reading a quote from Kafka, and then we'll go. Okay. So what I want to do is you please tell me. I can't say that artist's name, the one that you just said.
Modigliani.
Say it again.
Modigliani. Amedeo Modigliani.
Modigliani. You said that this art dealer, whose name is
Berthe Weil.
I can't say that, but that lady who didn't marry a doctor or a lawyer, who started to become an art dealer, much to her mother's chagrin, she would not out him like they were looking for him because he had an obscene painting of some sort. Do you know?
Well, remember, I mean, what we consider obscene and what was considered obscene at the time is very different. And I don't think there was anything obscene about the painting except that the female sitter was nude.
Well, there you go.
Berthe Weil lived in a section of Paris called Montmartre.
Oh, I love that area.
Yeah, the highest point in Paris. And it was a kind of rough and tumble place. Circus performers, fishmongers who sold pictures, cabarets, prostitutes,
Good times.
young artists. And this is the world in which Picasso lived, in which she found him. And she sold a few of his pictures for a pittance. I mean, for an amount that is so laughable. You couldn't get a cappuccino in Paris for it now. But he couldn't make a living that way. And in 1909, 1910, this young man, Kahnweiler, who was German Jew, emigre from Mannheim originally, which was the area of the Rhineland that my family came from, comes to Paris, and with money from his uncles, who were very wealthy financiers, who wanted him to stay in the family business, say, look, we will give you money for 1 year, and at the end of that 1 year, if you can't make your gallery work, you come back to work for us. So Kahnweiler gets to know Picasso, and Picasso very reluctantly forms a partnership with him. And at the same time, the little band around Picasso, Braque and company, also go into Kahnweiler's stable. And Kahnweiler is selling these cubist works of art, these radical works of art, which utterly subvert almost every aesthetic tradition in the West. And what Kahnweiler has to do is not just market them, he's got to be able to explain them, he's got to be able to interpret them, he's got to be able to tell people what it is that they are seeing. Because by the standards of a traditional history painting, a biblical scene, a war scene, these paintings make no sense. They have dissolving forms. In the portrait of Kahnweiler, there's a mustache, there's a top hat, there's a watch fob, there's an African mask, but none of them are attached to anyone who's recognizable as a human being. So this is really radical stuff. And Kahnweiler, to his credit, not only champions this art, but he writes the first great treatise about it. And that's one of the things which is interesting about a lot of the people that I discuss, is that while relatively few of them, at least who were founders of galleries, had formal education in art history, let alone university degrees in art history, they trained their eyes by scouring museums and galleries, scrutinizing piece after piece. And I think part of this is also just natural gifts that a few of us are lucky to have, and most of us just don't have.
Well, I have to ask, what is over your shoulder? What is that painting?
Well, this is a painting that actually fascinates my students. In the last year or so, when I was teaching on Zoom, which was, I think, probably less than satisfactory for all concerned. And I told my students that this was a relative of mine named name was Solomon Lüb, who was the son of a merchant in the Rhineland, and that he didn't want to go into the family business, but the father, who was a merchant who sold munitions and horses and food to the British Navy, knew Admiral Nelson. And Admiral Nelson told Solomon's father that he could let him into the Navy, but he could not do so if he was known to be a Jew. So he changed his name to Samuel Love and gradually worked up his way in the ranks, distinguished himself at the Battle of Trafalgar, and became an admiral. That's what I tell them. Unfortunately, none of it's true. I have no idea who this man is.
There's this kind of regal military fellow behind him, very Revolutionary War era, and he makes that whole story up. My guest is, I'm going to reset this, and I'm going to just do a quick little commercial break, and we'll bring you right back. That's Professor Charles Dellheim. He's a history professor at Boston University. His book is Belonging and Betrayal, How Jews Made the Art World Modern. And just ahead, I want to talk to him about the betrayal part in the time we have left together, as well as how did they make it modern? What was it? Did they push forth this Picasso type of stuff? Perhaps that's what I just got an inkling of. That's what I'm sensing. And where's this art now? Because the Nazis took it. And when they find it, does it get back to these people? To these people, those people, their family, their offspring? I don't know. So these are the things I want to ask him. But first, I want to let you guys know that the show is all listener and viewer supported by you. I'd love if you would just subscribe for free at Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, or you can make a donation at PayPal or Venmo at Molangan, Molangan. Your donations go to all the support around creating the show and keeping it going, and the tech support and all of the bells and whistles. And I would love if you would consider, please, going to Patreon. Do you know Patreon? It's a really good, it's a place where you support artists and creators. It's called Patreon, Patreon.com. I'm going to put it up on the screen for you. And what I'll do there is you'll see all of the, you'll get all of the video chats and some extra special ones. You'll get backstage chats only available to patrons, and you do a subscription starting at $5 and going up. That's where all the video will lie, and extra bonus stuff. I update it all the time. So I give you some vintage things, cool things. So if you consider that, I would appreciate it. It keeps the shows coming. And also a little acknowledgement here for some shows coming up. Go to my website, Maureen Langan, Langan. Look at the website, and you'll see I have shows coming up in September in Los Gatos, California, Bellingham, Washington on the 18th of September at the Mount Baker Theater, Mill Valley, California on September 22nd, Long Island on September 24th. I love Long Island at the brokerage there, and Long Beach Island on September 25th. Very excited about that. Woo woo. All right. So I want to bring back my guest, historian, Professor Charles Dellheim, Belonging and Betrayal, How the Jews Made the Art World Modern. So I know we have a little bit more time left with you, so I want to get to it. We talked about belonging, the Jews wanting to mainstream themselves in the Gentile world, have the acknowledgement and success other people do. They got into the art world, many art dealers. Now, the betrayal part.
So the first thing you have to remember is, against all odds, these people who are outsiders very suddenly become prominent forces in the art world. They really come out of nowhere, or so it seems, late 19th, early 20th century. And in the 1920s and about 1930s, they are among the most influential merchants and connoisseurs in art. They are arbiters of taste. And what this does is to provoke or become a pretext for anti-Semitism. If you remember that this was a Gentile-dominated world, simply on a kind of economic basis, the people who feel that they are being threatened by these Jews who they think have no right to be here are angry. Some of it becomes ideological. And you see this not just with like garden variety anti-Semites who don't want the competition, don't like Jews, don't think they can ever belong, but with Nazis. And the story with the Nazis is very complicated because the Nazis have very grandiose cultural ambitions. Hitler was a failed painter, and if you ever see any of his paintings, you'll know why he was a failed painter. But
were they self-portraits? Maybe that's why.
They were. You're absolutely right, Maureen. He couldn't paint faces. I mean, that is, he couldn't see the humanity in others.
Oh, that's something.
I mean, one could go on about this.
Wow.
Anyway,
Wow.
so there's Nazi cultural ambition, but there's also cultural ambition in a particular direction. That is, in Germany, in the period right before the First World War, there's a very strong current of reaction against modern painting, partly because it's associated with the French Impressionists, and this is a kind of offshoot of the Franco-Prussian War and of ongoing antagonism. But also because this so-called painting of modern life subverts traditional aesthetic standards like perspective or subject matter. And in Germany in particular, there is an identification of Jews as the vanguard of this movement. And it's true that a couple of these people, the Cassiras, Paul Cassira and his cousin Bruno, who were the big champions of the breakaway avant-garde movement, the Berlin Secession, and Max Liebermann, who was Germany's foremost impressionist painter. They are Jews. But most of the people who are doing this art are not Jewish. So this is really just a libel. So there's Nazi grandiose cultural ambitions, but there's also that the Nazi aesthetic, if you want to call it that, is highly traditional. And with some exceptions, Nazis are revolted by any kind of modern art. And they think this modern art is degenerate, it is decadent. And this is something they identify with Jews and Bolsheviks.
Well, if they felt that bad about it, they didn't like it that much, why they steal it? What about that? Why did they steal the art if they hated it that much?
Well, I think partly because it's a really good question.
Thank you.
They stole everything. You have to realize that the dispossession of Jews that takes place, which is the largest dispossession of history, is businesses large and small, from the tailor shop to a department store, from a mom and pop business to a bank. Money, gold, furniture, musical instruments, apartments, everything was stolen. And the things that the Nazis steal, which they do very systematically, fall into two categories. On the one hand, there are these modern painting, and these modern painting, which is considered degenerate. And some of these paintings they simply destroy. But what they do most of the time is they take them to Switzerland and they sell them there for hard currency, which they use for the war effort, or they trade them for these old master paintings, especially for northern old masters, Rembrandt, Holbein, Vermeer, which are near and dear to the hearts of the Nazi brass. And one of the things which is interesting about this is the Nazis are convinced that Jews have no right to own these paintings, that they are incapable of understanding beauty.
Oh my God.
And the betrayal is,
wow,
in a sense, the promise of belonging, the promise of what we call assimilation, but what is really better to call acculturation is learn our language, imitate our ways, discard your own customs, discard your own language, pledge allegiance to our political institutions, and we will accept you more or less.
Oh my God, this is so painful to hear. This is like so hard to hear because we know that, but that's supposed to have been men. And
yeah.
It's ringing the same bell, and it's actually putting me in visceral pain. It's insanity to hear this, but that's supposed to be something you read about only in the past, and yet you're reading about. I just want to give a shout out to somebody who watches all the time and listens, George Ramos. Thanks so much, buddy, for tuning in. I wanted to read something that was in the book. I got the pre-copy before it comes out on September 21st, Amazon. It is called Belonging and Betrayal, How Jews Made the Art World Modern by Professor Charles Dellheim. This was very interesting. Kafka wrote this letter to his lover, and she was a journalist. I don't even know how to say her last name, but this is really interesting. He said, the insecure position of Jews, insecure within themselves, insecure among people, should explain better than anything else why they might think they own only what they hold in their hands or between their teeth. That furthermore, only tangible possessions give them a right to live, and that once they have lost something, they will never again regain it. Rather, it will drift blissfully away from them forever. That gave me goosebumps reading that.
Me too.
Wow, that's powerful. Very powerful. So you have here, they're betrayed, their art is taken. Now it ends up around the world. We know about this. Now this is your area of expertise. These masterpieces or somewhat masterpieces are works of art.
Right.
And the museums in Los Angeles, in New York City, in London, I'm sure many other places. What is morally, what happens once you go, like that was great grandpa Shlomo's painting. What happens?
So what happens is, it's a very complicated story. So a group of art historians and curators, who we know as the Monuments Men, and they are Monuments, Fine Arts, and Art Office.
Monuments Men, yes.
Monuments Men. They are.
Explain who they are for those who don't know.
So they are people like, James Rorimer, John Skilton. They are people, Lane Faison. They're people who end up becoming the directors or chief curators of almost every major museum in America. And they're trained in art history. They want to fight for their country. They want to serve. And they are originally engaged to protect historic monuments in preparation for D-Day. Because no one early on knows the inconceivably large extent of Nazi art looting. There's some knowledge that the Nazis have looted art from Jews, but how much, where it's gone, they don't know that. And after the war, based on intelligence which comes from a variety of sources, the Monuments Men find an enormous amount of art. It's buried in salt mines. It's found in monasteries, in castles, and it's all been hidden by the Nazis. And the question is, what do they do with it? And what they do with it ultimately is they repatriate it to the country of origin, where it came from. And then
all of these men or women, if they're involved, is to find these stolen, hidden, lost pieces of art,
right,
and turn them to their rightful country owners, people.
right. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One reason is, these guys want to go home. They've been in Europe for years, but the major reason is they don't have the local knowledge, or they think they don't have the local knowledge to track down who owns what. So they make the reasonable assumption it should go back to the country it came from. The problem is that the national governments, which had been reconstituted after the war, the governments which had been reconstituted in what had been Nazi-occupied Europe, have very, very mixed records about giving the art back.
Okay, what you have to do, though, hear from me, this is a piece I'm missing. The Monuments Men was after World War II? Is that when they went?
It's
this is
like,
a current day thing. This is a thing that, because a guy I went to high school with, his father, and his obituary was listed that he had been part of that.
Oh, well, you're talking about something which is planned in around 1942, 1943. Almost all the work is done after the liberation of France in August 1944.
So that's the time frame. And
that's the time frame.
Monuments Men are the ones going to, they're going to track down, are they from different countries? They're the scholars, they're the,
right.
Okay, so they're not military men necessarily. They're just those interested.
They're not military men, but they have military rank.
Okay. So we understand now they are going to find this art looted, stolen, and then they're trying to return it to its rightful place. And then we have some issues with borders and countries and post-World War II. Well, what if something was taken from your family? Your family had a nice little house in Vienna, and you were an art dealer, or that lady in France, in Montauban, wherever, I can't say French accents, but the hill, by the big cathedral. So she's there in the Bohemian area. She knows that piece now, like, it ends up in a museum, a major piece, but it belongs to Shlomo Goldstein's family. Like, how does it get back to them? Does it?
I think that the case is very mixed. The people who were major collectors and dealers, people who had a degree of political and economic clout, managed to regain some, but not all, of their art. And this isn't just because, let's say, France or the Netherlands, the governments don't want to give it back. It's also, the question is, where is the art? Who owns the art? And then, so it's a question of the provenance. So when any legitimate dealer buys a work of art of any significance, she'll say, where's the provenance? What's the history of this art? Who owned it? Where was it exhibited? And after the war, a lot of art is found, and some of it goes into, let's say, French museums.
Yeah.
And some of those works are recovered. Some of them are given back to their rightful owners or to their heirs, but not all of it. And part of this is because of very limited information. So men like Paul Rosenberg, major dealer, who was Picasso and Matisse's dealers in the 1930s, he ends up leaving France very reluctantly, goes to New York, and he begins searching for his art collection, almost all of which is taken from him. And he's able to find some pieces, but he's not able to find a great many. So part of this is bad will, but part of it is also bad luck. And what you see now, what's interesting is in the late 1990s, 5 decades after the end of the Second World War, there's this dramatic resurgence of interest in the fate of Nazi stolen art.
I'm interested.
Yes. Yeah. And there are all kinds of cases. The most famous is Gustav Klimt's great painting, The Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer I, which was painted in 1907 and was in the Belvedere, in the National Gallery. I mean, its whereabouts were known. And it's the person who should have been its heir was known. But there was an enormous, long-standing conflict with the Austrian government. Now, that's a very famous case, but what often happened is after World War II, all of a sudden, there's a lot of art on the market. And this art is bought by dealers, collectors, and museums. And it would be nice to say, oh, they didn't know. They had no idea. But if you're looking at a provenance of a painting, and there's a gap, and that gap is somewhere between 1933 and 1945, it didn't fall off a trunk and it wasn't in a cellar. So
does a person have a right to get that back? I mean, can they say that was my great-great-grandmother's? That's mine. That's our family's. Get it off your stupid, smelly museum.
Well, I think, it depends a lot on circumstances. Generally, I am, for a lot of reasons, very much in favor of restitution. But there are some cases. There was one recently at the Metropolitan, which was decided a few years ago, in which the heirs had acted decades and decades after the theft. And the circumstances of this particular painting, which was Picasso's The Actor, yes, it had been sold, and then it had been sold again, and then it was donated to the museum. So the question is, whose property is this? And in some cases, that's a very hard thing to decide. In other cases, it's absolutely open and shut.
We need Judge Judy on this case. Okay, well, before I let you go, I want to just give another shout out for the name of the book, and of course, we have to ask you this. Oh, I have two questions for you. First of all, but let me just tell folks, if you're just tuning in, Charles Dellheim, he's a historian and professor at Boston University. His book, Belonging and Betrayal, How Jews Made the Art World Modern. And there it is. It's a really cool looking book cover. It comes out, get it on Amazon. It comes out in a couple of weeks. So, okay, how did the Jews make the art world modern? There's the title. We can't bury the lead, but there it is. We got to come back to it.
Two ways. One, they are instrumental in transferring a massive quantity of great old masterpieces from Europe to America and from the old aristocracy to the new capitalist rich. And now this isn't just good for the rich, because more often than not, these are people who are opening museums like the Frick in New York, the Isabella Stewart Gardner, or my favorite, the Benjamin Altman collection, which goes to the Met in New York City. So the first way in which they're making it modern is they are making art available to people on the basis of something other than birth. The second way they're making the world modern is in a way more direct. They are the champions of the avant-garde. They are the champions of successive schools of modern art, from the post-impressionists, the Nabis, the Pointillistes, the Fauves, the Cubists, the Surrealists, up through the abstract expressionists. So in those two ways, Jews play an outsized role in transforming the art world and in shaping modern culture.
Very cool. I love how you just described. That was very succinct. I liked that. Okay, and then I have to ask you this. I think there's a difference between modern and exploitive commercialization. That Van Gogh experience, did you see that?
I did not. And I just had a
reaction, anger, rage. What did you have?
A journalist has just written a piece about my book in which he talks about the Van Gogh experience and the immersion, and he liked it very much. I can't judge it because I am sitting in Boston, and as an inveterate museum and gallery goer, I've been almost nowhere since the pandemic struck. the idea of an immersive Van Gogh experience doesn't thrill me. If you want an immersive Van Gogh experience, go to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. You can't do any better than that.
You know, it's interesting because I even said to you when I invited you to join me, and I'm very grateful that you are here. I don't know a lot about art. I know that I've been in Arles and I've been to Paris, and I've exposed myself to, not exposed myself, but and sculpture and Rodin. And I like to know about it. I like to know, I don't, you've thrown out names and places, and I'm sure, okay, all right. Because you want to experience it. You don't have to be an expert to see things. And I like that. I don't like it. Have a reaction to it. It's good. But when I went there, my first reaction, I just started to laugh when I went into the room because I thought, this is insane. I don't know why my visceral reaction was to laugh because it seemed absurd to me. There are people who get angry at me. There are people like, why did you go see it? You knew it spun around. If you have dizzy issues. I'm like, this is a commercial for Dramamine. This is like, I found it obnoxious. I found it overwhelming. Then I go, let me go into another room. There's 3 rooms of it doing all the same thing. They have cicadas falling on his upside down face. And I said, what is happening? And this young kid, he was a security guard, half asleep. I think he was like, can't take it anymore. I go, what's with the upside down bugs on his face? And he said, those are cicadas. I heard a couple talking about it. And cicadas, as we know, don't show up until every, 17 years? And he said the cicadas are like, Van Gogh he was asleep. Like, people didn't know about him for so long. And now he's coming back like the cicadas. I mean, that's absurd. That's insane. But then I went out, and then you see in the gift store, you see $100 Van Gogh umbrellas. I know people merchandise in museums, but it was obnoxious. The thing I like the best, though, is on the doors that you weren't allowed to enter, they said no go, G-O-G-H, and I thought that was clever, no go. I liked that. So I don't know, I would love if you ever do go, if you would just, people get mad at me that I don't like it, but I can't help but not like things I don't like. So if you go, would you please tell me, oh my God, somebody goes, F that, F those people who don't, people can speak very freely on the Hanging with Langdon. But if it gets young people excited, F them, you don't know why I'm giggling. Oh, Heather's funny, she's funny. But if you do go, you must tell me what your experience, because mine was a bad experience.
But I think that after what you just said to me, I'm extraordinarily unlikely to go.
But you know what, though? That's me. I mean, there's people who will, we all, I did like that Van Gogh, Loving Vincent, that film about Van Gogh. Did you see that film, Loving Vincent? It's done 100 artists do it in like an impressionist type of.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I will see it.
That was it. I just liked how they did it with subtitles, and it was just a cute story. And it was an interesting story, supposing what was going on in his life before his death. And it's done by 100 artists, just every frame. I found it so unusual, interesting. Oh. So a friend of mine said after I had come down hard on the no-go Van Gogh experience immersion Dramamine commercial, he said, Maureen, you have to just watch this movie. And I actually don't watch movies twice, and I want to watch it again just to see how they do it and how it all worked. Yeah, that's what I got.
There you go.
Hey, thanks for being with me today. Really nice to meet you.
Same here. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And that is Professor Charles Dellheim. Get his book, Belonging and Betrayal. It's just a fascinating, I don't pretend to know. I just like to learn. I like to learn what people have to share. And he's a very bright man. So get that. And you guys can support the show because you keep them coming when you go to PayPal or Venmo at Mo Langan, or go to Patreon and become a monthly subscriber at Maureen Langan. So check those out. Check out my new website. We just updated it, maureenlangan.com. Get your Don't Make Me Hate You t-shirt. Follow all my gigs. I got a lot of nice things happening in California, New York, New Jersey in the month of September. And all of this downloaded for free on Apple and podcasts wherever you get yours. Thanks a lot, you guys. See you, George. See you, Heather. And until we meet again, bye, wig. Mwah.